Thank you, everyone. We are on episode 13, continuing the reading of the crucifixion and death of Jesus Christ by Kelly Ritter. We are on the chapter, How Was the Man on the Shroud of Turin Crucified? And this is a very good chapter. So let's get started reading that. How was the man on the Shroud of Turin crucified? The Shroud of Turin, the most studied artifact in history. The Shroud of Turin is considered by many to represent the actual burial cloth of Christ, and several publications concerning the medical aspects of this draw conclusions from this assumption. The Shroud of Turin and recent archaeological findings provide valuable information concerning Roman crucifixion practices. The interpretations of modern writers, based on a knowledge of science and medicine not available in the first century, may offer additional insight concerning the possible mechanisms of Jesus' death. When taken in concert, certain facts and the extensive and early testimony of both Christian proponents and opponents, and their universal acceptance of Jesus as a true historical figure, the ethic of the gospel writers, and the shortness of time interval between the events and the extant manuscripts, and the confirmation of the gospel the gospel accounts by historians and archaeological findings ensure a reliable testimony from which a modern medical interpretation of Jesus' death may be made. After Jesus and his disciples observed the Passover meal in an upper room in a home in southwest Jerusalem, they traveled to the Mount of Olives, northeast of the city. Owing to various adjustments of the calendar, the years of Jesus' birth and death remain controversial. The life and teachings of Jesus of Nazareth have formed the basis for a major world religion, Christianity, have acceptably influenced the course of human history, and, by virtue of a compassionate attitude towards the sick, and also contributed to the development of modern science and modern medicine. The eminence of Jesus as a historical figure and the suffering and controversy associated with his death has stimulated us to investigate in an interdisciplinary manner the circumstances surrounding his crucifixion. According, it is the intent to present not the theological treatise, but rather a medically and historically accurate account of the physical death of the one called Jesus Christ. Sources. The source material concerning Christ's death comprises of a body of literature and not a physical body or its skeletal remains. Credibility of any discussion of Jesus' death will be determined primarily by the credibility of one's sources. For this review, the source material includes writings of ancient Christians and non-Christian authors. The writings of modern authors in the Shroud of Turin, using legal historical method of scientific investigation, scholars have established the reliability and accuracy of the ancient manuscripts. The most extensive and detailed descriptions of the life and death of Jesus can be found in the New Testament Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The 23 books of the New Testament support but do not expand on the details recorded in the Gospels. Contemporary Christian, Jewish, and Roman authors provide additional insight concerning the first century Jewish and Roman legal systems and the details of scourging and crucifixion. Sinisa, Livy, Plutarch, and others refer to crucifixion practices in their works. Specifically, Jesus or his crucifixion is mentioned by the Roman historians Cornelius Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and Suetonius, by Roman historians Thales and Pelagion, by the satirist Lucian of Somasta, by the Jewish. Jesus walked with the disciples to Mount of Olives in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was arrested and taken first to Annas and then to Caiaphas. After the first trial before the political Sanhedrin at Caiaphas's reference, Jesus was tried again before the religious Sanhedrin, probably at the temple. Next, he was taken to Pontius Pilate, who sent him to Herod of Antipas. Herod returned Jesus to Pilate, and Pilate finally handed over Jesus for scourging at the fortress of Antonia and for crucifixion at Golgotha. And Jesus would have been crucified on Friday, April 7th. At nearby Gethsemane, Jesus, apparently knowing that the time of his death was near, suffered a great mental anguish. As described by the physician Luke, his sweat became blood. After this is a very rare phenomenon. Bloody sweat, hematidrosis, may occur in highly emotional states or in a person's bleeding disorders, or with the person with bleeding disorders. As a result of hemorrhage into the sweat glands, the skin may become fragile or tender. Luke's description supports the diagnosis of hematidrosis rather than eccrine chromohydrosis or stigmatization from blood oozing from the palms or elsewhere. Although some authors have suggested that hematidrosis produced in hypovolemia, we agree with Buckland that Jesus' actual blood loss probably was minimal. However, in the cold night air, it may have produced chills. As the literature is not exhaustive with reference to the Shroud of Turin, in the way of the Shroud of Turin, and the way he was crucified, and it is not easy to draw significant information from only one photograph of a man on a linen sheet. This study tries to add some detail on the issue based on both the image processing of high-resolution photos and the Shroud of Turin, and on experimental tests and arms and legs of human cadavers. With regard to the man on the shroud's hands, a fist hypothesis states that the left hand of the man on the Shroud of Turin was nailed twice at two different anatomical sites. The mid-carpal joint medially to the pisiform between the lunate and pyramidal and the capitate unconnect bones distort space, and the radial carpal joint between the radial lunate and scaphoid. Also, the right hand would have been nailed twice. A second hypothesis referred by the authors states that the hands were nailed only once at the DeSoto space, with partial lesion of the ulnar nerve and flexion of the metacarpal joint of the thumbs with regard to the man on the shroud's feet. The imprint of the sole of the right foot leads to the conclusion that the man on the Shroud of Turin suffered a dislocation at the ankle just before the nailing. The entrance hole of the nail on the right foot is a few inches from the ankle and excludes the double nailing hypothesis. The nail has been driven between the dorsal bones. The man on Shroud of Turin suffered the following tortures during crucifixion: a very serious and widespread causalgia due to total paralysis of the upper right limb, paradoxical causalgia, a nailing of the left wrist with damage to the ulnar nerve, a similar nailing of the right wrist, and a nailing to both feet, usually using only one nail, that injured the plantaris medialis nerves. The respiratory limitation was probably not sufficient to cause death by asphyxiation. Also considering the hypovolemia produced by the scourging and the many other tortures detectable on the Shroud of Turin, the principal cause of death can be attributed to a myocardial infarction. Image processing of the Shroud of Turin shows that the man represented in it has undergone an underglottal dislocation of the humerae on the right side and lowering of the shoulder, and has a flattened hand and enophthalmus, conditions that have not been described before. Despite several studies on the subject, these injuries indicate that the man on the Shroud of Turin suffered a violent blunt trauma to the neck, chest, and shoulder from behind, causing neuromuscular damage and lesions of the entire brachial plexus. The posture of the left claw hand is indicative of an injury of the lower brachial plexus, and is the crossing of his hands on the pubis, not above the pubis as I would normally be, are related to traction of the limbs, as disappearance of the thumbprints is because of entrainment of the flexor pollicis longus tendons while the nails were driven through the wrist. The blunt chest trauma, which resulted in the body falling forward, was the direct cause of a lung contusion and hemothorax, confirmed by post-mortem leakage of clots and serum from the chest